Hi everyone. I hope you're all well and safe in these current crazy times that we're all going through. Um, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Lizzie Benton. I'm the founder of Liberty Mind and I help to improve company cultures. And one of the ways that we do that is through implementing flexible and remote working. So we have quite a lot of experience of already helping established companies implement flexible work and remote working. So it's something we have a lot of experience of already. And obviously, with the current climate, with obviously us all working from home at the moment, it's something that a lot of business leaders and managers really want to know how to ensure that productivity remains high and they can also support the well-being of people as well. So um, basically, this presentation is going to help you think about the current climate of remote working, but also look at the ways that you can use this situation to obviously improve your remote working abilities and operations as it is. So let's crack on with the presentation. So basically, managing remote working in a crisis is obviously very different to how we would normally remote work, because in a normal remote working environment, we have a dedicated workspace. So that might be a home office, or we might even have a specific office dedicated to us at a co-working space. We have a very structured day routine and a schedule that we have to follow. There are clear goals and objectives that have been identified. And we've already put a really good support system in place to help people who are remote working. But obviously, at the moment, it's very, very different in regards to the remote working and working from home that we're all doing. So there's no dedicated work environment necessarily. Not all of us are lucky enough to have a home office. We might be working at the kitchen table while trying to homeschool our children. Obviously, we've got care responsibilities. So as well as our children, we might also be having to pop to the shops and get resources for our elderly relatives as well. So there's a lot of pressure on at the moment for people in this current climate. There's also obviously, because remote working hasn't been identified or hasn't, been easily kind of scheduled, then it's very much a case of there's no sort of support, or there's little support in place at the moment. So it's perhaps all a little bit messy and feels really unstructured, and that's what we want to try and improve and get better at, basically. So there's a few things that you should definitely think about, especially considering how uncertain this climate is that we find ourselves remote working within. And there's a few things that I would definitely recommend for you guys to try and think about. The first one is to be realistic, because with trying to juggle so much with care responsibilities, with children, with carers, be realistic about what can be achieved by your team. They're going to be juggling a lot at the moment. It's going to be a very stressful environment, and especially with this lockdown as well, especially in the UK, it's going to feel very fretful and just very overwhelming for people that are trying to do their best work while managing this situation. So really be realistic about what people can achieve. I also think it's important that we be mindful of others and of our colleagues in this situation. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, worry, and by trying to micromanage their every move and their projects, we're just going to perhaps put a lot of stress and overwhelm even more so onto them. So try to be really mindful about how you're approaching them and how you're approaching their work, so that they don't feel like there's this added pressure going on. I also think it's really important to remember to assume positive intent. Trust is a big, big factor when it comes to remote working, because that essentially is what's going to help us to, thrive and create that kind of good communication that we need during remote working. So, really try to assume that people are doing the best with what they've got, rather than, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, how do I know people are not trying to work or skiving or things like this? And that kind of negative mindset is not going to help you or the colleagues you're trying to support. So try to assume positive intent in these situations, especially at the current time. So I've rounded up a few questions that people have already sent in to kind of preempt any sort of questions. But if you do have any questions throughout this, like I said, do post them in the chat on the right hand side, and I will answer them at the end of this presentation. So one of the big questions is, how do I know people are getting work done? Let's be honest, we all want to make sure people are getting work done. So this was one of the biggest questions that came up. So to be honest, I really think everybody should be using a project management tool in the first place, especially when it comes to remote working. So there's project management tools such as Asana, Trello, Basecamp, Monday. These are all ones that we have experience of supporting businesses in implementing, and they're fantastic at giving you a real good overview and update on what people are doing. A lot of these systems also have email notifications, so you can get an idea of when someone's completed a project or when someone is currently working on a project. So it gives you a really good overview so that you don't have to necessarily micromanage people. The other thing to do as well is to ask for daily or weekly project updates, and try to decide on a time that's right for the person who's remote working, rather than trying to force a time on them. Again, if we try to be mindful of the current circumstance, let's give them an opportunity to be able to talk to us without the children being around, or so that they can actually give us a really clear update. So asking for a daily update is really good, and also doing weekly project updates, especially whether that's a video call or a video chat, so that you can actually, see body language and see how people are getting on and have a bit of face-to-face communication. There are also time management tools that you can use, for example, Clockify. So if you want to really understand how long it's taking someone to do a project, you can use systems such as this to really help you understand how long it's taking and how their productivity is being impacted. But again, really think about how productive people can be, because we're not working in a traditional remote working sense. So really try to think about exactly what people are using. You can also request they track time spent on the project as well. So they can do this manually themselves, and you can ask if they could send a report back at the end of the day. Again, this sometimes can feel a little bit micromanaged, especially if people are trying to do lots of projects and manage lots of care responsibilities. And the big thing to really ensure is that you don't come across like you don't trust them, especially with this, because you don't want to feel like they're being watched or audited in any way in the current situation. So request that they track time spent on projects, and more so as well, try to use it as a reference to understand general processes. Does a particular project take a long time when we're remote working, or is it because things are a bit slow operationally? So use it as an opportunity to learn, really, rather than try to micromanage or audit people's time. One of the other big questions is, how can I support people during this crisis? Because we are all feeling a bit worried, a bit uncertain about what's going on, wondering when this is all going to be over. Those struggling, especially with their mental ill health, are going to be in a critical condition at the moment. I've got a few families and friends that struggle with mental health, and I know at the moment this isolation and being very detached from people is a very real struggle for them. So there's a few ways you can really continue to support their well-being. I massively recommend regular check-ins. So make these phone calls or video chats and not instant messages, because people really want to hear your voice or see your face and have it's a very minor human communication, but even that can really help people. And do a check-in that really is about, how are they feeling? How are they coping? Is there anything you can do to help them? Don't make this about work, make this about well-being. Really try not to use instant messages. I know it's really easy to get into the habit of slacking someone, or perhaps WhatsApping them or texting them or even emailing them, but really try not to use instant messages, and get a good check-in on them by the phone so you can understand their tone of voice and if they need any more professional support. Creating a buddy system as well is really good, especially if you've got quite a large team, and if you're the sole HR manager or you're the sole person normally in charge of employee wellbeing. It can feel quite overwhelming that you've got to manage lots of people's wellbeing and do all these check-ins. And you've also got to be mindful of your mental state, because If you have lots of negativity, negativity is contagious as well. So we can start to be really impacted by sort of that and get quite sort of worn down. So instead, creating a buddy system is a great way to team colleagues together who are responsible for supporting each other and checking in on each other. So creating that buddy system can be a great way to sort of ease the burden of checking in on lots and lots of people. The third one is to provide guides to help people with their personal situations. Obviously, there's a lot going on right now and a lot of fear and worry around people's personal situations. That could be around their financial situation, that could be around their mental health. There's going to be a lot of things that people are worried about. So actually creating a document that provides your team with all of this external support on what's out there can be incredibly beneficial. So whether that's looking at some of the government information about what people can do about their mortgage or their rent, what's happening about the healthcare or the health system if they're currently managing a health problem, and also looking at the charities and the helplines that are available for those struggling with their mental health. So creating a really good guide for people's personal situations can also be a massive support in a time like this. And emailing that out and saying, look guys, this is the help that's out there if you need it, can really help, because sometimes if they're really in a bad state, googling around doesn't always help, but if you're providing a bit of guidance, it can add that extra support. So another question that's a bit unique that we've come across is, what do we do for people who can't do their role remotely? Because obviously remote working is, it's a great solution. It's a great operational practice for a lot of businesses, but not every role can work remotely. A lot of our roles sometimes require face-to-face interaction or some kind of physical skill that we have to do. So what can we do for those roles that are unable to do their roles right now? So one of the two things I often recommend is provide them with learning opportunities. So is there any online courses or further learning they can try and get their heads into during this time to help enhance their role further? It can also be just a great distraction for all the madness that's going on in the world to learn something new. The other thing as well is to maybe give them a task or a project that relates to their role, which can help the company move out of this space once the crisis is over. I've got a client at the moment who has a role who can't do their work remotely. She has to go out door to door sort of sales. So obviously at the moment, door-to-door sales just isn't there. So instead they've given her the role of doing research on product development and the trends that are coming in this year. So they've tasked her with something different and looking at other markets that they can move into. So her role for the time being, just to keep her busy and keep her supporting the business, is to actually do some research and look at some of the things that can help the business move out of this eventually. So really think about, actually, what else could I do with this person? Yes, they can't be, physically doing their role right now, but how can we utilize our people to work in the best way possible? So maybe try and think a little differently to your traditional working processes. And a biggie is, how do I keep morale high and the company culture going? Because, we all love being within our company culture. Not all of us do well remote working because it can be quite isolating. And some of us thrive off being in a culture that's collaborative and it's got people around and there's an atmosphere and there's a really positive environment. So to come away from that, especially people that perhaps live on their own, can be really a real struggle. So we need to think about how we can keep morale high and the company culture going. So one of the things I definitely recommend is to use instant messaging apps to create a company profile where teams can share news and social communication. So Slack is a really good channel for that. I know a lot of organizations that use Slack for their company culture. And it's just doing fun things like, what's your win for today, and keeping it really social and fun and lighthearted. Who's got pet of the week or something. Just anything that can generally just alleviate people's stresses and enable them to continue to feel really good and part of the company culture, essentially. So Slack's definitely a instant messaging app that I would highly recommend. The other tip is definitely try to recreate your existing culture virtually. So try to think about how you can, if you did beer o'clock Friday, could you do that via a video chat where you all sit at your laptop and have a drink together? How can you recreate a lot of your current, culture aspects in a virtual way? And think about how you can incorporate that virtually at the moment. That's a really good thing to do, especially because culture is so important for keeping people feeling like they're connected and that they're communicating, and continuing that collaboration. So really try to think about how you can recreate that culture virtually. So one of the big things around remote working is, obviously, when we look to support businesses with flexible or remote working practices, there's a massive test and trial stage. This sort of situation that we're in is completely unusual because businesses have literally had to eject the people from their business with perhaps zero experience of remote working or zero operational functionalities. Generally, when we try to implement flexible or remote working, there's a huge test and trial phase that we go through to help businesses ensure that it's successful and that people are supported. So honestly, I would almost use this situation as your test and trial phase, because let's be honest, we need to take some kind of positivity from this opportunity and see it as a place of growth and learning rather than the drama and the negative trauma that it is. So let's try and kind of switch our mindset into a place where we can grow from this and learn from this situation. So I want you to imagine that right now you're testing and trialing remote working. And there's a few things I'd suggest you do along the way. So massively keep a note of any operational issues that arise and employee well-being. So, whether you get yourself a notepad and pen or, you take note on it digitally, really keep note of some of the operational issues that are coming up. What are the productivity roadblocks that are stopping people? What's the well-being issues that are coming up? Really try to identify those daily and weekly so that you can look back and think, wow, okay, we've got some of these problems around remote working. Can we find solutions to them? And that's a really great way to be reflective on this time rather than seeing it as a complete negative. The other thing to look at as well is highlight any areas where further training may be required for teams. Obviously, with a lot of systems coming into play, usually we would say that all teams should be trained on the systems or software that they're going to have to use within remote working. But generally, it might be better to try and do this virtually at the moment, but highlight any areas where further training might be required. And that does literally include anything from the role that they're doing to the systems that you've got in place within your business. So whether that's the CRM, the project management tool, anything like that, where you feel like people need to perhaps enhance their learning. So there's also a few practical things that you guys should definitely start doing while all this remote working madness is going on, that can help to, nurture this remote working for however long it's going to last, and give your team some real structure and support, and hopefully you guys some, help in keeping people productive and happy while they're at home as well. So a biggie is definitely create a remote working handbook for your team. So this should be the same as your company-wide handbook and include things such as what are your set working hours? Are there any social media policies? Confidentiality, obviously they're at home, so what needs to be sort of kept confidential and things like that. Health and safety as well is really important, especially remote working. Company equipment responsibility, data protection, employee code of conduct, dress code, illness or injury processes. So really think about some of these core areas, and in respect to remote working, how does it differ from the traditional office environment? So create a handbook that enables people to use it and get the information they need when they're working remotely, and also what's expected of them when they're working remotely. I know dress code seems a bit of a funny one right now because I'm sure there's a lot of people working from home in their pajamas. But if they have to do a client call, do you expect them to be, smartly dressed, or is there a particular dress code that you request when people are face to face with clients? So it's simple things like that, really, that need to be given to employees to ensure that they're supported and know what to do in these situations. It can alleviate a lot of stress and worry. For example, if somebody does come down ill, how do they report that to you and what happens? So really try to think about these areas in your remote working handbook, and also try to make it as interesting as possible. I've seen a lot of handbooks that are basically Word documents in black and white, and they're depressing to look at, and I would never read them. So I know you probably haven't got the budget to go all out design them at the moment, but even if you could just design it in Canva, or just make it look slightly more interesting, that will have a much better way of engaging with people than just a black and white document that looks very legal and scary. So really think about how you're approaching these things as well. Building communication guides is a really great way to improve the communication of your remote working team. So, for example, instant messaging, should that be left for urgent project updates only? Video calls, maybe that should be left for project discussions and meetings. And phone calls, maybe that should just be left for wellbeing check-ins. So really come up with some ways in which you want the communication methods to be utilized, because what you don't want is people being sat on their emails the whole time, especially when perhaps their time is even more limited in the current situation, especially, like I say, if they're sat next to their child while trying to work from home and work. They want to try and use that time really productively, not by constantly checking their emails if they've got a project update. So set out some guidelines so that people don't feel like they're chained to their inbox, and they can actually be productive on the projects they have at hand. The other thing to do as well is to continue to provide the culture. So I've tapped into this a little bit earlier on, but really think about how you can continue to nurture your existing culture. And that includes, learning and development opportunities. What online courses or things can they do from home that you can continue to help them with? Or is there any mentoring or tutoring or coaching that you can support them with? Wellbeing incentives should also be a priority right now, especially to keep people active, and physically and mentally well is especially important during this crisis. So can you recommend online workouts or meditation classes that people can take part in, just so that they have some kind of structure to their overall well-being as well? It's also good fun to try and keep those idea and innovation sessions going. So I know a lot of organizations that do sort of huddles and collaborative sort of sessions and ideation sessions. So try and stimulate that as well, so that people are using this time to be really creative, think of new services, think of new products that you could be launching, and stimulate some of that creativity that's within the team, and this mental freedom away from the office. What new ideas can they come up with? Employee feedback as well is really important during this time, especially when people are remote working, and even more so if you're trying to test and trial this to understand if this is something that your business can probably do in the future. Understanding what people actually need from their remote working environment and from their managers and their colleagues when they're remote working. So even if you send out a very short survey every week, checking in on people's well-being, checking in to see how people found the productivity, was there any productivity roadblocks, what got in your way from doing your work? You can find all sorts of things from this information and use this insight to continue to improve your processes and your operations when it comes to remote working. So utilize this time to really drill down on whether remote working is actually a long-term possibility for your business operation. So obviously, I really want to go over some of the benefits of remote working. I know it's not the ideal situation right now. We're not all in the most perfect working from home situation as we perhaps dreamt it. But there are so many benefits it can bring to people. So, the ability to manage the work-life balance. If people are care providers, whether that's for an elderly relative, for somebody with a disability within their family, or even maybe their children, then sometimes actually having remote work can really ease the pressure of trying to commute to work, trying to get back on time, things like that. So the work-life balance is great, especially in regards to remote working. It also provides autonomy. So, being able to get on with your work when you need to is really important. And this can be a massive perk for people that are very self-driven and motivated, that just want to get on with their projects. It also increases productivity. So there are some stats that I've found around increasing productivity. There's lots of data on this, which I will share with you in a resource that I'll send you all. But there's lots of ways that actually it's been found to increase productivity because there aren't as many distractions than in a traditional office. Because if we think about it, we've got other colleagues distracting us. We've perhaps got people visiting in the office or customer phone calls. It can be very different environment to what we're used to in a traditional office. And of course, it also improves health and wellness. I mean, I know we're obviously going through this virus at the moment, but generally speaking, we shouldn't be in an office when we're not feeling 100% because we don't do our best work. And obviously, we end up passing that illness onto our colleagues. So when people aren't in the office all of the time, they're not picking up germs from their colleagues. You know, the common cold in the winter is the popular one that everyone comes in sniffing and sneezing, and before you know it, everyone's had it in the office. So actually, you know, maybe implementing remote working over particular seasons can be really good to continue to improve health and well-being. It also has many benefits in regards to the business as well. You know, when you're working remotely and you have a remote working operation, you can hire people in any country, in any part of the UK, and you can really tap into global talent rather than just local talent. So it's fantastic to be able to find people that you're looking for. So, you know, you could be based in a rural part of the UK but have an international team. So there's really no limitations in regards to the people that you can hire when you have a strong remote working operation. It also reduces the environmental impact because you've not got lots of people commuting in their cars, going backwards and forwards from work. This is especially prevalent in big cities and big towns where people are still getting in their cars and don't have the ability to walk or bike to work. So it really can reduce the environmental impact that your business has on the greater world. It can also decrease your overheads. You know, if you're spending a lot of money on a fancy office in a city, it can be extortionate the amount of rent those places are. But instead, you know, if you have a remote working team, you can actually reduce your overheads because you can offer them, you know, a set budget for setting up their home office, and it can be a lot less than renting a physical space in a popular city. And of course, it also increases productivity, which means when productivity increases, finance increases within the business. So there are many, many benefits to this remote working. It's just a real rubbish time to be testing and trialing it, but we've got to do the best we can. So I have created a free ebook that includes a step-by-step guide on how to test and trial remote working, the benefits of remote working for business and your people, some of the latest data, also the downsides of remote working, because like I say, it's not a quick fix. This isn't a solution that works for everybody. It can be very difficult to implement, and some case studies from businesses successfully remote working, including the likes of Lego, because they've been remote working pretty much since the internet existed. They've got people all over the world doing remote working for them. So it's really insightful, and I will send that to all of you after this webinar so that you've all got a PDF copy as well. So that's the end of my presentation, but I would love to answer any questions that you guys have so that we can talk.
Lizzie?
Yes, hi.
Hi, could I ask a question? Thank you, it's been really useful. I suppose there's a question about individuals who aren't very good at not having structure. How could a manager or someone in HR actually provide that structure for them?
Yes, definitely. That's a fantastic question, Catherine. Thank you. So what I would definitely do is have a chat about what their current day looks like to really understand, you know, have they got a child that they're responsible for right now? You know, try to understand their existing responsibilities. And then what I do is have a chat about how they're currently structuring their day and try to see it as a supportive conversation. So think about actually how do they like to work. Do they like to tackle big projects and tasks in the morning, and then we have a project update in the afternoon? It's really about having that conversation, helping them to structure their day, because like I said, this is very unusual for people aren't used to this lack of routine, this lack of structure. And sometimes it can also be the mental roadblocks rather than the physical roadblocks that are getting in the way, like procrastination and things like that, and not having those little mental breaks that we all get used to during a traditional office, going for that coffee at 11 o'clock or whatever we get used to. We don't have that structure anymore. So it's really important to help them build their own structure.
Yeah, thank you. That's really useful.
So we've got another question about how do you ensure your team members are attending suggested webinars on well-being, etc. That's a really good question, especially because we want to ensure that people are healthy and well during these times, and mental health especially is going to really suffer right now. So in regard to making sure people attending the webinars, I would really try to incentivize it. So whether you try and gamify it for your team just to add a little bit of fun to it. So think about how you can maybe even create like a tally, or make it quite competitive of who can burn the most calories or do the most steps in the house. So really try and think of how you can maybe gamify it. That's one way I'd tackle it, first of all. And also maybe think about, because not all of the webinars that you send across might be relevant. For example, yoga is quite niche. Some guys might not be up for doing yoga, or some people might not be up for doing really high physical activity. So think about the kinds of well-being webinars that you're sending to people and what will really interest them as well, especially in regards to their own personal physical fitness or their mental health. So tap into being as personal as possible and not being too generic is what I would say to that. Okay, thanks, Brian, for your question. So, Brian's question, if you can see it in the chat, is I have found that common projects or challenges work great when people are together. Best practice is usually a kick-off meeting to introduce a challenge. How would you best do this online? Great question, Brian. And I would definitely recommend things like this. So virtual meetings using things like Zoom or Skype, or if you have another video conferencing tool that you use, definitely do that. Maybe even make it quite fun. If you've got a whiteboard at home, or if you can create some kind of presentation, get really creative with it, get people on board with it, and make it feel really engaging and fun, because it's really hard to stimulate that energy and that buzz when you're all together collaborating in an environment, physically in an environment, is so different to when we're virtually. And trying to do this online, you need to have as much energy and creativity as possible to make it really engaging for your team. So introducing a challenge in a creative way with as much positive energy as possible is a great way to do this, and getting people to collaborate, even creating a space where people can put initial ideas. So there's lots of things like online whiteboards that are great for this, tools that are like, they are literally an online whiteboard where people can start pinning ideas and sharing, and you can get lots of people to collaborate on there, which is great. And then also getting people to, think about how they can then discuss these as well. So getting people to put together initial ideas, and then maybe having a chat about some of these pitches, and having 5-minute presentations about some of these ideas that people have got, so you can start actually implementing them and listening to people as well. So I hope that helped, Brian. Great question from Catherine. What's the biggest drawback you have found of remote working? Two things I would say in regards to remote working. So for the people remote working is the lack of face-to-face support. So it's really hard to, with people that are currently learning something new or going through a challenging time with their role, the one thing I've seen is people that really struggle with just being able to ask a question to their manager or their colleague. We're so used to having those people around us to go, oh, hey, what do you think about this? and not having that can be really stifling, and that's where learning can start to feel really, really difficult. So that is one of the big things from a people perspective I've seen. Most definitely self-isolation, I mean, as we're all experiencing right now, is very difficult. Having that lack of human to human connection can feel very isolating. I know lots of people that have worked remotely, both in regards to business and professionally, and they say the one thing that actually personally you need to get out, you need to see other people, because you start feeling very isolated. So that's definitely in regards to personnel. In regards to the business, I would say the biggest drawback I found is operationally. It's if the operations aren't in place and there's not a good clear structure and systems, it can really start to fall down on its knees. And there also needs to be a huge element of trust. You need to trust that your team are going to do well. If you do have this attitude of, I think they're probably going to be skiving, or how do I know they're working, then that to me tells me that you don't trust your people. And even further from that, it makes me question why you've recruited them in the first place. Because generally the team that you should recruit with and you should have on board should be, the kind of people that are going to continue to work to the best of their ability for your business. They should be so engaged in the vision and the values of your business. So I think, for me personally, when businesses start to see trust issues around remote working, I think there's actually a bigger problem there. Well, if you do have any other questions and you don't feel like having them answered on here, then please feel free just to drop me an email, and I'm be more than happy to answer your questions. I really hope it has been useful for you guys. And like I say, I'm going to drop the PDF and this presentation in an email so that you guys can look back over it. There's a few other webinars coming up over the next few months around particular things around company culture. So if you want to join me again and you found it useful, then I'd love to see you all there. But I'd just like to thank you all for taking your time, because I know it's a very stressful and uncertain time right now. And I just want to thank you all, and stay safe, stay positive. We will all eventually come out of this, and just see it as an opportunity for growth and new learning. So thank you so much, all of you.